Ford's Boss 429 was never meant for the street. Built to satisfy NASCAR homologation rules, it packed hemispherical heads and enough power to embarrass anything with a bow tie. But Mopar had an answer. The 446 pack with 3 two-barrel carbs, feeding 390 horsepower through Chrysler's bulletproof bottom end. When these two finally settled it on the street, one delivered legendary performance while the other delivered something even better, performance you could actually use. 1969 changed everything for Ford. They needed to homologate the Boss 429 engine for NASCAR competition, which meant building at least 500 street-legal examples. The problem was simple. That massive semi-hemi motor didn't fit in anything Ford made. The solution became legendary. Ford contracted Carcraft in Brighton, Michigan to shoehorn the 429 into Mustang sports roof bodies. They reworked the shock towers, modified the front suspension, relocated the battery to the trunk, and somehow made it all street legal. The result was the rarest and most powerful Mustang ever built. That Boss 429 engine was engineering brilliance wrapped in controversy. Ford rated it at 375 horsepower, which made insurance companies happy and fooled exactly nobody who understood engines. Those hemispherical combustion chambers, borrowed straight from Ford's NASCAR program, breathed better than any wedge head design. The crescent-shaped chambers gave the Boss its real name, the Blue Crescent, after the blue paint Ford used in the chambers. Reality was closer to 500 horsepower at the flywheel, maybe more. Ford undersold the numbers to keep the engine eligible for production car racing classes and to prevent insurance rates from killing sales completely. The Boss came with a single 735 cubic feet per minute Holley 4-barrel sitting on an aluminum intake manifold. That carburetor was massive for 1969, feeding an engine that made torque everywhere. The hydraulic camshaft was mild enough for street driving but aggressive enough to make power when you needed it. The forged steel crankshaft, forged connecting rods, and forged aluminum pistons meant this motor could handle serious abuse. Ford built the Boss 429 to survive 500 miles at Daytona running wide open. Street driving was practically a vacation for this engine. But that performance came with serious compromises. The Boss 429 Mustang cost nearly $5,000 in 1969. Astronomical money when a standard GT Mustang ran $3,200. You paid for hand assembly at Carcraft, for the extensive modifications needed to fit that monster motor, for the Dana 60 rear end and top-loader 4-speed transmission that could handle the power. And you lived with quirks. The relocated battery made trunk space a joke. The hood scoop was functional, but massive. The wider front track meant turning radius suffered. This was a race car with license plates, not a daily driver that happened to be fast. Rarity made the Boss 429 instantly collectible. Ford built just 859 examples in 1969 and 499 in 1970, barely over the NASCAR minimum. Most went straight to serious racers who understood what they had. Finding one today in original condition is nearly impossible. Finding one that hasn't been modified is rarer still. Values reflect that scarcity. A numbers-matching Boss 429 can command $300,000 or more at auction. This was never meant to be a volume seller. This was Ford's middle finger to Chrysler and General Motors, proof that blue oval engineering could match or exceed anything from the competition. Chrysler took a different approach. The 446 pack engine debuted in 1969 as an option for the Roadrunner, Super B, and later the GTX and Charger. Instead of hemispherical heads and exotic engineering, Mopar started with their proven 440 wedge motor and made it breathe better. 3 Holley 2-barrel carburetors sat on an aluminum intake manifold. 6 barrels total, hence the 6-pack name. The center carb fed air during normal driving, keeping the engine docile and manageable. Stop the throttle and the outboard carbs opened up, dumping fuel and air into those massive cylinders. The result was 390 horsepower at 4,700 revolutions per minute and a tire-shredding 490 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 revolutions per minute. Those torque numbers told the real story. The 440 made peak twist just above idle, which meant it launched like a freight train off the line. Floor it from a standing start, and the rear tires instantly overwhelmed whatever traction you thought you had. The weight transfer was violent. The nose lifted, the rear squatted, and the car clawed forward while sideways. Traction bars became mandatory equipment for anyone serious about using all that power. Without them, wheel hop could break axles and transmissions. The six-pack setup brought real advantages over a single four-barrel. Better fuel distribution across all cylinders meant more complete combustion and more power. The progressive linkage, center carb first, then outboards, gave you both street manners and race performance in the same package. Drive easy, and the engine purred along on one two-barrel carb, getting reasonable fuel economy and staying docile. Need power, and all three carbs opened up, delivering that full 390 horsepower without hesitation. This was streetable performance in a way the Boss 429 never quite managed. Chrysler made the 446-pack accessible. Option it into a Roadrunner, and you paid around $460 over the base 383 engine. That was serious money, but nothing like the Boss 429's premium. You got a complete package: the engine, heavy-duty suspension, sure grip differential, and chassis reinforcements needed to handle the power. The A12 package on the Roadrunner and Super B included the fiberglass lift-off hood with functional air scoop, blacked-out treatment, and special stripes. This was a factory hot rod you could actually afford and actually drive. Production numbers reflected that accessibility. Chrysler built thousands of 446-pack cars across multiple model years and body styles. The engine proved so popular that it returned in 1970 after initially being a 1969 only option. You could get it in the Roadrunner, Super B, GTX, and Charger RT. Each configuration offered slightly different performance characteristics, but all shared that brutal low-end torque and triple-carb aggression. This wasn't a limited production homologation special. This was a volume performance option designed to win stoplight wars and drag races across America. The performance numbers told competing stories. Car Life tested a Boss 429 Mustang in 1969 and recorded a 14.0 second quarter mile at 102 miles per hour. That seemed disappointing for an engine supposedly making 375 horsepower, until you understood the weight. The Boss 429 Mustang tipped the scales at 3,870 pounds, nearly 400 pounds heavier than a standard Mustang. All those modifications and that massive engine added serious weight. 0 to 60 took 7.1 seconds, which was quick but not spectacular. The Boss was fast, but it wasn't the drag strip dominator its reputation suggested. Here's where it got interesting. Those numbers were for a stock Boss 429 with the hydraulic cam and single four-barrel. Swap in the mechanical cam Ford offered as a service part, open up the exhaust, and retune the carburetor, and the Boss transformed. Suddenly you were running low 13 seconds or high 12 seconds. The engine had massive untapped potential that the factory strangled for streetability. Most Boss 429 owners eventually modified their cars because leaving that power on the table felt criminal. The 446-pack delivered more consistent performance right from the factory. Motor Trend tested a 1969 Roadrunner with the six-pack and recorded 13.5 seconds at 105 miles per hour. That was a half-second quicker than the Boss 429 and 3 miles per hour faster at the trap. 0 to 60 came in 5.5 seconds, nearly 2 seconds quicker than the Boss. The lighter B-body platform and better weight distribution made the difference. The six-pack Roadrunner weighed around 3,500 pounds, giving it a significant advantage in power-to-weight ratio, despite having less peak horsepower. That 490 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 RPM was the secret weapon. The six-pack hit hard off the line and kept pulling through the mid-range. The Boss made more power up top, but the six-pack already had you by 2 car lengths by then. Street racing wasn't about peak horsepower. It was about the power you could use from a stoplight or a rolling start. The six-pack delivered usable torque everywhere the tachometer went. The real difference emerged in daily driving. The Boss 429 was temperamental. Those massive heads and that single four-barrel meant rich running at idle and cruise. Fuel economy was abysmal, single digits if you used any throttle. The handling was nose-heavy, the turning radius was terrible, and the clutch effort was high enough to build leg muscles. Park it at a show, and crowds gathered. Drive it regularly, and you understood why most owners kept them garaged. The 446 pack was actually pleasant to drive. That progressive carburation meant the engine behaved normally at part throttle. You could cruise on the highway without the engine loading up or running rough. The B-body platform, especially in the Roadrunner, was well-balanced and predictable. The steering was lighter, the clutch easier, the whole experience more refined. You could drive a six-pack car to work every day and only unleash the fury when opportunity presented itself. Maintenance told another story entirely. The Boss 429 required constant attention. Those hemispherical heads and that aggressive cam meant frequent valve adjustments. The single four-barrel carburetor needed regular tuning to run right. Parts were expensive and sometimes hard to find because so few cars existed. Take it to a random mechanic and you got blank stares. This was a specialist car that demanded specialist knowledge. The 446 pack was bulletproof. Chrysler's RB series engines were legendary for reliability. The forged crank and robust bottom end could handle serious abuse without complaint. The triple-carb setup required synchronization occasionally, but any competent mechanic could handle it. Parts were cheap and plentiful because Chrysler used 440s in everything from trucks to luxury cars. Break something, and you could fix it without mortgaging your house. Both engines left massive legacies. The Boss 429 proved Ford could build an exotic performance engine to match anything from Chrysler or General Motors. That semi-hemi design influenced Ford performance engineering for years afterward. The Scarcity and the Mystique made it an instant collector piece. Today it represents the pinnacle of Ford muscle, the most powerful, most exclusive, most desirable Mustang ever built in the classic era. The 446 pack became Mopar's street fighter, the engine that proved you didn't need exotic engineering to dominate. That combination of proven reliability, massive torque, and triple-carb drama captured everything muscle car enthusiasts loved. It was accessible, it was fast, and it worked. The six-pack proved Chrysler understood street performance better than anyone. They built an engine that won races and survived daily driving, that thrilled owners and respected budgets. The value difference persists today. A Boss 429 Mustang commands six figures easily, sometimes approaching $400,000 for pristine examples. The 446 pack cars, Roadrunners, Super Bs, GTXS, trade in the $50,000 to $100,000 range depending on condition and originality. Both appreciated significantly, but the Boss 429's rarity and mystique pushed values into another stratosphere. You can actually find and afford a six-pack car. You probably can't afford a Boss 429. So which engine wins this battle? On paper, the Boss 429 has the exotic engineering and the mystique. Those hemispherical heads and that NASCAR pedigree represent the absolute peak of Ford muscle car development. But step back from the mythology and look at what actually mattered in 1969. The 446 pack was quicker, more reliable, easier to drive, and significantly cheaper. It delivered better real-world performance with less drama and fewer compromises. The Boss 429 succeeded as a homologation special and a collector piece. It got Ford into NASCAR with competitive equipment and created an instant legend. But as a street car, it was compromised by its racing mission. The 446 pack succeeded as a street engine that happened to be great at racing. It won stoplight battles, dominated drag strips, and survived daily abuse. Different missions, different results. Both engines represent their manufacturers' philosophies perfectly. Ford built the Boss 429 to prove they could compete with Mopar's Hemi, exotic, expensive, and uncompromising. Chrysler built the 446 pack to win races and sell cars. Practical, powerful, and proven. The Boss 429 was the engine you wanted to own. The 446 pack was the engine you wanted to drive. And in the real world of muscle car battles on American streets, that difference mattered more than any specification sheet could capture.